Hello and welcome to the Green Scene. I'm Hope Switzer, the Vice Chair of the Brandon Environment Committee. Today we have Dave Barnes in the studio to talk about protected spaces, his brainchild. And thank you for joining us today, Dave.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here, Hope.
So you put forth this pamphlet, Community Health Forever, to Brandon City Council. And what was the purpose of your idea?
Well, you know, the idea for this, it came to me, honestly, straight from the trees. Where I live, in the deep woods east of Brandon in the Assiniboine, on the banks of the Assiniboine, the trees are very big and very old, and my property is in the midst of the finest, oldest grove of oaks. And one that fell over, and I had the luck to measure its age, was 170 years old, and that tree was only 12 inches in diameter at breast height. That's not the biggest oak tree. And so this project was really designed by the trees where I live. It's the idea of those spirits and their ancient wisdom, which really tells us that in order to live well, we need to respect trees and the habitat that they offer to all terrestrial beings, ourselves included. So I went to the City Council in March of this year and asked them if they would entertain creating a protected spaces network in order to set aside parts of our fair city which are environmentally unique and which contain valuable and life forms to be found nowhere else in the city. And they responded very positively, so I was very pleased with that.
And why is it that you want it protected, this specific area?
As I say, this specific area is where I live. This is the city parcel of land that surrounds me. And so I know the trees so well because they are my neighbors and we all really live together. And the groves of trees on this parcel of land, much of it has been deforested over Brandon's history. But those parts that remain in forest today are really quite unique. They contain oak, which is probably over 300 years old, and many other very unique organisms, some of which we'll see this afternoon. But it just struck me that these organisms are deserving of protection, of a protected life, where their future can be assured. And there is no development plan here. It's floodplain, so it's quite a logical thing to institute a network of protected space.
What is being done across Canada? Because I know that protected spaces isn't just a totally new idea.
You know, protecting space is often thought of as the job of the federal and the provincial governments. They do most of the land protection under various legal schemes. And cities have only joined that effort recently. So cities like Toronto, a few American cities, Seattle, Portland, Ottawa, of course, was built with a green belt around it and designed green space. In Toronto, there are big city parks which have been dedicated to forest regeneration and conservation, and so the protection of space by cities is now something that's catching on, yes.
And what does this protection mean, like above and beyond what was originally there, or?
You know, the city has a category of land use which is reasonably protected. It's called open space, so it's not to be developed already in any human serious way. There must be no permanent structures in open space, and most of the open space land in the city is floodplain. The protection that I've asked them to institute is simply one step higher, which asks the city to guarantee that we will enter no mechanical machinery, that we will not be ditching or graveling or building any roadways, logging, cutting trees for commercial uses of any kind, which is just a formalization of protection.
And how will it be protected? Like, what would be the process of protecting it?
Well, I dare say it's already done. So, you know, the city has passed their unanimous decision in that regard. What remains now, I think, is a bit of a legal contract, a caveat upon the land, which I think the city will be entering into with Manitoba Habitat Heritage Corporation. I think Mr. Snure, who will be joining you, will have more to say about that part of it. So there will be a caveat which the Manitoba Habitat Heritage Corporation helps the city to design, and that will indicate the parameters of what land uses will be permitted and what will not. And so
what is the intention of the land?
Well, in my interpretation and the project that I brought forward, I see conservation as a great important stone in the structure of this network and of this space. So we need to preserve those trees, certainly, the ancient trees, and we certainly must not log them out. For the rest of the landscape, which has been modified by human, in fact, all of the landscape there is modified by human activities. We've had forest clearing early in Brandon's history, so I am proposing that we regenerate forest on a lot of that land, that we regenerate a wetland there, which likely stood when Brandon was first founded, and regenerate forest all over the landscape, and weave into that forest the tissue of fruiting trees and shrubs and plants, which can also be thought of as food for humans and animals, so that we attempt what is called a permacultural restoration. That is, the educational value of teaching our workers and our young people that in order to live permanently on this earth, we as a species need to enter into long-term planning within living in forested environments. So we're hoping to build what's called a food forest.
I believe that we had one map, your second map, where it sort of lays out what some of the permaculture areas would be.
Yeah. There's a map indicating the general layout of the land that I've proposed to the city that they've decided to protect as the first space.
Yeah, you can see the green spot.
You can see the green spot there on the far upper left, and you can see the hydro property in the lower right, and the hydro forest is labeled HF off to the right there. That's a very large and lovely woodland. So you can see that on the parcel that's outlined in black, the lands which are forested are away to the west end and the northwest corner there. And a large portion of the 40-acre piece is now sort of, you might think of as prairie wasteland. It's spurge and thistle and brome grass, a lot of invasive introduced species there. And a few, yes, some of the native species of grass and flower are there as well, certainly.
And your plan is on the next map, I believe?
So the close-up now shows a little bit more of some of the land use. There you can see my own land, which I call Trees Blood Farm, to the left of the permaculture preserve, and you can see the pond on my land. The L, the piece marked L, is the low-lying land in that area, which I propose would be a natural wetland. Probably was a creek back in the day when this was all wooded. That would have been a creek. It is lowland. The mouth into the river is quite low. It's a natural exit for the water off the landscape. So if we construct a dam there and do a small dugout there, we can regenerate a very thriving wetland with fresh water. I'm quite sure of it. The oak woods are marked top left in the northwest corner. There are a couple of oak woods and ash maple woods in the southwest corner. But a lot of that, grayer colored material on the screen is simply modified grassland, which we propose to turn back into forest over the next 50, 100 years.
Is this going to be pricey, like all of these
It's a
modifications?
huge development, you know, and who knows what the price tag might be. The important thing is that we're not asking the city to fund this. We are going to form a management group and raise funds. So the plan is to raise the money to do this through granting processes. You couldn't imagine a greener project. I almost lay down the challenge to invent a greener project than restoring and regenerating forest land with food bearing plants woven into it. I think it's a marvelous example of a good environmental initiative. So we stand to be a very attractive project, I think, to many of the granting bodies.
What is it used for right now?
Right now it's not used. Really it's not. The deer are the principal residents there, crossing it, grazing a bit on the grassland. Birds are there nesting, certainly, in the grasses.
Walking your dog? I noticed when we went out there.
People definitely walk their dogs. Thank you for that. Yes, the neighborhood walks their dogs in that area. It's a lovely place to walk dogs. And there's an informal trail which is used by mechanized recreation as well, which really does not conform very well. And I do not believe that it's necessarily a legal activity within the city, but at any rate, we may be asking the users of snowmobiles and quads to kindly not drive them upon the protected space. I think that's the declaration of the initiative.
So what are the other limitations? Like no quads, no...
Yeah, no recreational vehicles, no mechanical interventions, no machine interventions. And really, that's about the size of it.
And you were speaking a little bit about the value you believe this permaculture project will bring. What are the other values?
Oh man, thank you for that question. The project really hopes to initialize a great thought about what we can do with our wasteland. Here we have some beautiful harebells showing on the screen, some of the native species that are hiding in that brome grass, but much of the scene you're looking at there is introduced brome grass. The odd native flower is going to show up. There's a stand of cherry there. You can see the black knot fungus on the stems of some of those cherry shrubs. This is a view here of the magnificent old oak woods. This is the old stand, what I call the tree's blood woods. These are the old ancestors. These are the trees in there that are 200 to 300 years old. They were standing there before Brandon was born. It was even a thought. And here we have the quad trail leading down to the oaks. I think we're going to enter the forest a bit and have a look at some of the oaks closer up. They are handsome and wonderful things. Yes, here's an oak tree. We're inside the woods now, and such a magnificent thing. This one here I would guess to be 250 years old, perhaps more. As we go higher and higher and examine the crown of the tree, it will dominate the canopy of the forest. So this oak has been here and is well established at a great height. It will not be displaced unless its stem has any spot where fungus has got in at the soil. Otherwise, it's almost impregnable.
You always think of trees, or I always think of trees as being really fat if they're old, but these trees, they just get really tall and strong.
Yeah. These trees are growing in a forest, so it encourages height. As well as diameter. Here we're looking at some leafy spurge among the echinacea. There's echinacea and purple prairie clover. These are wonderful flowers. And the gaillardia, what a sweet bouquet. I think there's a wild rose in there among the echinacea in the background. It is a very rich and thriving, small but thriving community of wildflowers. There's the wild rose that we would hope to propagate inside the space and encourage the spread of that. There are lovely techniques to quickly change brome-dominated grassland into native grassland.
So what will the site be when it's finished, as far as...
You know, when your children have children, Hope, I would hope that this landscape would be forest. And that not only that, it would be yielding the residents of this lovely place, it would be yielding them food. That there would be huge berry patches, raspberries, saskatoons, upon that landscape. Many other berries too. We should probably be planting haskap. We should probably be planting cherry trees and walnut trees and apple trees, plums, you know, to make a park which is really a park which feeds the spirit as well as the body. I would hope it would be a large and magnificent forest, dominated by oaks because they are a native tree.
So we would be bringing our students basically to come and see all of these beautiful plants and pick on the trees and
Well, sure. You know, I just like to say, as a lifelong educator, and I may not be working inside of the industrial system now, but I do not give up my right to be a teacher. I believe that when you're in a forest, you are a student. You are by your very nature, because there are your teachers right all around you, the big ancient trees, and they are saying things to us.
So when would it be usable space? Like how long into the
You know,
future?
it's usable space now. We should advertise the trails that are there, improve them a wee bit, put some natural materials down to encourage walkers with their dogs to come. I think it's a natural thing. We could add a few amenities such as composting toilets and benches, and who knows, maybe we'll raise enough money to put up a little cookhouse or something, and people could have a wee picnic or so. That is all remaining to be dreamed up for inviting the human visitor. And we should be getting busy resurrecting forest bit by bit across that landscape. There's tree planting to be done for the next 25 years, certainly the rest of my life and more.
So when does this project get started? Like when do you...
Well, you know, the city is studying and doing their diligence this winter. And I'm sure Mr. Snure can speak to this, but they will be preparing the legal guarantees upon the landscape so that they get their management on paper so that it's all fair and square for everyone to read. This is a fine thing to be doing. Next summer, I hope to be planting and being active on the land. So during the winter time, we will be doing some educational work, raising awareness, seeking a committee of friends and interested people from the public to volunteer time, perhaps on in an organized committee, and in some way organizing a group to manage this particular landscape. So that'll be all happening this winter. Next spring, I hope to put the shovels in the ground.
Cool, I look forward to that. How can people get involved?
Well, you know, they can contact the Green Scene through the Environment Committee, certainly. They can phone me, and if my phone number could be put on the screen, we don't have a website, so 728-6278 will get you Dave Barnes, and I'm happy to accept calls about the program. And
well, before we get to Ted Snure, is there anything you wanted to close with, or anything we haven't brought up yet?
Well, I should like to mention that one of the very vital tools at our disposal that we haven't spoken about too much this time is permaculture. Mm-hmm. And permaculture is the type of well, it's not quite agriculture, but it is in some way related because it has to do with food productivity in some ways and habitat creation. I think permaculture and permaculture gardens, large and small, are wonderful additions, and so I hope to see the park, the space here named in a permacultural way and dedicated to permacultural applications. So that will be part of the future work over the winter. And
so our little own permaculture experiment in the city of Brandon.
Yes, well, you could think of it, you know, briefly as designing our own food forest. A handsome idea.
Well, I think it sounds great. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you for hosting, and such a great idea, the Green Scene. I'm very pleased to be here.
Well, I look forward to having you back again.
Westman covers local stuff? I'm glad someone does.
Actually, we've invested over $1 million in TV equipment for community programming. As well, we've trained over 200 volunteers who broadcast 22,000 hours of local programming and public service announcements each year. It's an important service for Western Manitoba communities that only Westman provides.
Westman. Look to us and see yourself.
Well, thank you for coming back to us. In studio, we have Ted Snure, who is General Manager of Developmental Services.
General Manager of Development Services, yes.
Thank you for joining us today. We had Dave Barnes on earlier, and he brought to council, I believe, March 18th, a proposal. This one is basically asking the city to develop a protected spaces network, I believe.
Yeah, David came forward with a kind of a unique idea, and that was to, at the city level, to take on the responsibility for preserving land. Normally that process is advanced up to the federal and provincial levels, and he's asked that the city consider taking it on at the city level. City Council was in agreement after we've done a quick review of what he was asking for. And we've looked at the best measure to try and protect the land for a permanent time frame is to work through Manitoba Habitat Heritage Corporation.
What was it before, this open spaces bylaw or something?
Under the city zoning bylaw, there are various designations of land use. So you have residential land use for homes, you have commercial land use for buildings and commercial uses. Along the riverbank, City Council and the Planning District authorized it to be protected as open space, or lands that are there to be left as natural space condition as we can, or to what the existing agricultural practices are in those particular locations. The piece of land that Dave came forward for is actually zoned open space, so it is protected at a certain level. Unfortunately, it's only by bylaw, and city councils can change a bylaw. And what David was asking for was something more permanent, and that's where we did our review, and we found that working through Manitoba Habitat Heritage, we could get something more permanent.
And is that the initiative, Protected Spaces Initiative, the Manitoba-wide, or how do they protect?
Well, the province of Manitoba actually has some protected spaces that they look after.
Okay.
Something as nearby would be the Brandon Hills, as an example, where they have preserve up there.
Oh, so that's just provincial jurisdiction?
That's just provincial jurisdiction.
Oh, I see.
And what we're looking at is doing it at a city jurisdiction. The mechanism that we would have through Manitoba Habitat Heritage is they actually have an act that allows them to enter into agreements with private landowners and municipalities,
okay,
which then takes that piece of land and puts it into a permanent level of preservation, that the agreement is tailored to try and leave the land as it exists at the time that you sign the agreement. And within that agreement, you can also say, we want to do certain things. David has the concept of reforestation as an example. So the agreement would say reforestation, and we may actually identify on a map, here's the locations we're looking at for reforestation. Here's the location we want to look at for creation of a wetlands, or here's the location where we want to do some fruit trees or those types of trees that could be available. Here's maybe an interpretive area where we can actually use it as an education tool for children, for adults, or for people who just want to walk through and do a self-interpretation. So those are the types of elements we would like to see incorporated into this agreement with Manitoba Habitat Heritage.
And how did you guys go about coming to this conclusion? Like, did you, I believe you had some community involvement, or how did?
There was a stakeholders group.
Okay.
As a result of council's wish for us to consider it, we brought together a group of stakeholders, which Dave was able to assemble in terms of some participants that he was aware of.
Okay.
We brought in the conservation district that the city belongs to. We invited Manitoba Habitat Heritage. We invited some provincial individuals, Manitoba Hydro, who has land near us, adjoining landowners who are near the existing piece of property. We did a kind of a mini workshop in about a 3-hour time frame, which I thought was very effective. We identified that, yeah, it makes sense for this to happen. And it makes sense for us to try and do something along the lines of a permaculture concept. The dilemma then became, well, how do you do this? How do you make it such that you can incorporate these things and make them permanent so that it's available for the enjoyment of everyone in the community now and into the future?
So what is the timeline? I did speak to Dave about this a little bit, but he said something about starting next summer for planting?
Yes, right now what we've done is we've had a meeting with Manitoba Habitat Heritage. That's our property department has had that meeting. They are going out and they have done a land inventory to assess what exists right now. When they bring that inventory back, David will be sitting with us, meaning the staff in the property department, Manitoba Habitat Heritage, and actually trying to lay this out. What will work, what won't work, how do we map this out? We then propose to take this to that larger stakeholder group again, bounce it off of them, see what their thoughts are, gather that information between now and, I would say, maybe February of next year, and really put the polishing elements that we need in this legal agreement to tie it together. Our goal is to have something available and ready that we can actually roll out and get something happening by next spring. And I'm pretty sure that's Dave's desire. He'd like to see something happening by next spring as well. And how do we start to march this down the road of actually becoming the first piece of land in the Protected Spaces Network? Because there'll be other pieces.
Good. Do you have some other contenders right at the moment?
We do have one. It's a piece of land that's south of Kirkcaldy Drive on the south side of the river. It was a piece of land that was actually dedicated to, through a will, someone who wanted to give it to Brandon Riverbank Inc. to preserve as a natural space. Brandon Riverbank Inc. does not like to own property, so it passed the land on to the city with a caveat that it be protected in a natural state as much as possible. Here's an opportunity for this to become the second parcel. And in fact, we have asked Manitoba Habitat Heritage to do the assessment of that same piece of land. It's a little bit different situation than piece by Dave in that part of the land is cropped. If you were to be at Dinsdale Park and look across the river, you'll see some crop land and then you'll see some forest land to the kind of north and west. And it's that combination of some crop land and forest land that we like to try and protect as well.
Cool.
So we're on our way to 2 properties, not just one. So Dave's vision has already grown. It's gone from his initial concept of a piece of land right adjacent to his property to actually the building of a network.
I'm sure that was his intention.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Ted, and I hope to have you back again soon.
Anytime, it's my pleasure.